I'm Josh Wisenbaker, and we're going to talk today about how to take some Mac Minis and make more Mac Minis out of them, essentially. So the question is, what are we talking about here today? And what's all this about? First of all, why would you listen to me when I have something to say? So I'll briefly introduce myself. Also, I'm going to talk about challenges that happen with development in the Mac OS world and Apple platform world. They generally happen everywhere, but this is specific to our own favorite platform. Some solutions that we can have around that, and the one that we use is Anka, and then best practices that I've found over the past year or so of using it, and then plenty of time for Q&A. So to get right into it, why me? Right? Well, one is I've been doing this for a long time. Been around forever. Most people got exposed to Joel Rennick and myself back in the Mac OS 10 server days with when we ran AFP548.com and Mac OS 10 server mailing lists and things like that were very exciting times. So been around a long time. If you want to ever feel old, run a web page and then have people tell you later that when they were in high school that they really liked your web page. That'll make you feel pretty ancient pretty quickly. But since AFP548.com, I spent a good long time at Apple. And the last 5 years of my time at Apple, and then the 4 years since I left there, I've been focused on development. I'm currently a principal software engineer at Jamf, and I work on the Jamf Connect product line. Joel and I had sold Orchard and Grove to Jamf, and we moved over there. Joel's moved on, but I'm still there and still doing software development. So I've got plenty of first world experience from this. I did a lot at Apple of touring around, seeing other dev shops at major customers, seeing what challenges they had, and then left Apple to get to deal with those challenges myself, and then trying to solve them and help solve them at places like Jamf. And as an added bonus to that, it's not theoretical anymore like it was when I was at Apple. Now I actually have to ship software. Right? We've got stuff that we have to release. So I actually have to work with other developer teams, QA teams, things like that. So that gives us quite a bit more time and exposure to doing things in a way that most shops actually run into. So what are some of these challenges around development? So the biggest one is that it works on my machine problem. Everybody that deals with developers has heard every single developer tell them that at some point. Right? So you get sent something to test. It doesn't work. And you say, hey, I'm trying to test this. It doesn't work. What's going on? And they tell you, well, it works on my computer, so I don't know what's wrong with your computer, why it doesn't work there. So this is a really common thing. And if you want to know why, it's because of entropy, right? It's because not every computer is the same. And developers tend to tweak machines lots of different ways so that by the time they build something, it is in nowhere near any kind of configuration that your machine is going to be in, or the QA machines are going to be in, right? Because in this way, there's all kinds of different stuff. There's different caches, if you got, and that can cause a huge amount of issues when it comes to Xcode, automatic code signing, whether it's got certificates or profiles or other things on there that it needs, different keychains, different versions of Mac OS, different tooling installed. Plenty of times somebody forgets they had something installed to help them with development, that when they try to run their test product somewhere else, it doesn't work because all the things that are installed aren't there. So this is a problem across the industry. And the way you have to fix this is that you need to start cloning things, right? You have to have repeatable builds. The builds have to be repeatable. You need to have a consistent environment to be able to run these things in. And that allows you then to have QA. You can do automated testing, automated shipping of software, all that sort of stuff. So continuous integration, continuous development are the terms that are often thrown around for this. And essentially, it allows you to always be building the software and always be testing the software, and that something is always shippable, right? So if you're always building and always testing the code continuously all the time, and you're doing it somewhere else that isn't the developer's machine, then you know that that software is going to work. If it works on their machine and it doesn't work on the build systems, then it works on my computer really doesn't help, right? Because it needs to work everywhere. Now, for solutions to this, most of them that come up are virtual machines, right? Because it's nice to be able to, this doesn't take over a whole computer. It doesn't take a whole Mac to run one build process. So you want to be able to split that up amongst the machines and have a bunch of different hardware utilization. But also, we want to have these ephemeral virtual machines. Right? They're going to be here one moment, you use it, and then you throw it away. And so they come back the next time from a suspended state. The next one you make is an identical one to the first one you used. They're fresh every single time, and that means there's no entropy in here. That means that every single time you run something off of that virtual machine, it is a fresh starting clean slate every time. And so it gives you that consistent environment so that you get rid of the it doesn't work on your machine problem. This way you always know what's going on. The solution that we use at Jamf and other folks have used, and I know there's been some other talk of this so far at the conference, is Anka. We've got Anka Build, which is from a company called VR2, which gets confusing because everyone says I talk to Anka, right? Not I talk to VR2. But it is an orchestration system for virtual machines that is made for CI/CD. It isn't necessarily made for long-lived VMs, right? So in this way, it's different than, say, ESX or some other solution that also supports the Mac, in that it's not made to start a VM up and then have it there running for months and months. This is very much made for composable images that you start it, you stop it, and it throws it away. This can run a bunch of different places. You can run them on EC2, which is kind of where Anka directs people these days. You can run them at Mac Stadium on the Orca platform, but you can also run them in-house. So you don't have to go to a hosted solution for this. The thought here being that even if you use EC2 instances, those are fairly expensive for Mac Minis. You have to pay for them in 24-hour blocks. Right? So that kind of takes away a lot of the attraction for EC2 for a lot of folks. Right? If you're going to be paying for EC2, the idea is normally you want to pay for it by the second, not necessarily by the day. The Mac Stadium is the same thing, and a lot of times with these solutions, you still have to end up managing a lot of this yourself anyway, and you may already have hardware that you can use for this. So the infrastructure that gets out there is fairly simple at its core for Anka. We've got nodes, right? We've got some Mac Mini nodes over there. These are running Mac OS. It is not a bare metal solution. So you're just running regular old Mac OS on them. And then you can have a controller and a registry as two different server containers of some kind. The controller does orchestration. It decides what to spin up where and directs things. The registries are where your templates are stored so that the nodes can get them. Now, there's also a simplified version of this that doesn't have the controller. You can just let the nodes kind of manage themselves and grab whatever they need. You can do this scenario if you've got other tooling in there that manages where things run. A lot of people, I think, use the controller registry combo, but you also use another tool like Jenkins or TeamCity or some other kind of building infrastructure orchestration so that it decides what nodes to go to and things like that. When you go and spin up a job, you just tell, in our case, we tell Jenkins, I need to run this. It requests an image of a certain type, and then Anka decides what node can run it and where it should spin it up. And it goes ahead and gets it going. So to take a little further look here at some of the best practices that we run into with this, and this is really kind of what I think most people are interested in. There's been a bunch of them. Anka has made a lot of VR2 has made a lot of improvements to Anka over the past years or so, and a lot of things that you used to have to tweak and do that manually, you don't have to do anymore. But there's still some things to keep in mind. One is if you're running it yourself, it is hardware. Right? It runs an Intel or Apple. The Intel is the version 2. The Apple Silicon is version 3. The Apple Silicon does not have quite feature parity yet with Intel, but it's pretty close. One of the things to note about the Apple version, or Anka 3 version as it is that they enforce the 2 VM concurrent limit from the Apple SLA on there. So if you currently have 3 VMs per node and you move over to Apple Silicon, you're only going to be able to have 2 VMs per node. And that's because they're going ahead and enforcing the Apple license agreement there. If you've got homogeneous Intel machines, you can use the pair virtualized graphics, which means you can use hardware acceleration for your graphics. So in that case, you can have metal inside your VM. It is an optional setting on Intel. It is on by default for Apple hardware because that's a little more homogeneous. So it makes a gigantic difference in the performance of the image when you're running through tests and allows for more tests than you otherwise would be able to run when it comes to different frameworks that require metal. The most important thing probably for speccing out your nodes is cores. You're going to run out of cores before you run out of RAM in most cases. And you can usually, in Intel Mac Minis anyway, you can add more RAM. You can't add more cores very easily. So cores are the thing that is going to be your limiting factor as to your scaling in most cases. 2 to 4 cores, 2 is the minimum just to make it run in most cases, and you're going to need 4 cores or more for most VMs running these different test scenarios. Because with Xcode, you can have parallelized builds, parallelized unit tests and UI tests. So every one time you have a parallelized something going on, it wants another core. So that's something to keep in mind. For the registry and the controller, this is typically Linux. You can run it on the Mac, but once you reach a certain scale, they recommend running it on Linux. And this can be hardware, VM, a container. It can be pretty much any kind of Linuxy thing. They have specific system requirements on their webpage, but you can just have a Linux VM of some sort. Doesn't have to be big, doesn't have to be sturdy or strong, but you can run everything in there. When you use the registry in the controller, you have a dashboard, and you can perform a lot of basic maintenance tasks in here, get an overview of your usage and things like that. Some people like more reporting, and in that case, there's a Prometheus exporter and some Grafana that you can get going to get really detailed reports about use of templates and virtual machine and hardware utilization. One of the things that's good in here a lot of times is just how many VMs are you using. Typically in our setup, we run anywhere between 20 to 25,000 instances a week of individual VMs. So it's far more busy than we would think normally. So having this kind of ability to track things definitely helps out. Something to keep in mind for the registry and the controller is that it is based off etcd for a lot of the configuration sharing, and there is regular maintenance that needs to be done to that etcd database. Otherwise, it can get slow. VR2 has some information on their page. They also recommend looking at the etcd web page to look at what the regular maintenance is required there as well. If you don't do this, then eventually things start getting slow and kind of start grinding to a halt. And even if you reboot stuff, then it doesn't come back and everyone panics and runs around, and it's not much fun. But making sure you just take care of that maintenance as well. They do have some high availability as well, you can have multiple controllers, multiple registries, and then connect the nodes to multiples. And then the nodes will take care of some of the load balancing on their own. You can also use Kubernetes to hide those details behind in the K8 cluster. And then the nodes only need to connect to that one as well. So that sometimes makes it a lot simpler. For networking hardware, faster is better, obviously. You can get Mac Minis now with 10 gig Ethernet on them. So that's fast. Multiple interfaces, you can do those sorts of things. If you want to do any kind of traffic shaping, though, that's up to you. This, unlike, say, ESX, where it has support for segmenting out traffic and round-robining things and raw LUN mappings and all that sort of stuff, this just kind of treats network as network. So if you want to do any kind of traffic shaping, you're going to need to use standard tools built in, PF or other stuff to do that shaping of traffic from processes and nodes out to endpoints. An example of why you want to do that, maybe you want to separate the cloning of templates between nodes onto a separate network. So that will give you the ability to do that. Generally, it's pretty quick to pull these things, though, and it does multiple concurrent streams of data, and chunks the images and things like that. So really, we haven't run into any real trouble, though. So I haven't gone down that traffic shaping route yet. Something that is really cool is that Anka Develop is the same package that you run on the nodes. So in Anka Develop, the Anka virtualization package, it's free for developers. You can get it and just install it on your Mac and use it. It has all the same Anka commands for the command line that the server has. It just does not connect to the Anka cluster commands. It doesn't connect without having a license on the backend. So you can practice and learn and tweak your workflows locally, decide how you want to build things, and then once you're all set, you can then copy it over, those steps over to your nodes where you want to build stuff. You can connect to the nodes, connect to the cluster from a remote area, and then remotely, and then build your image and then try to sync it up, but that takes a long time. We find it's typically better to either work on the network or connect to one of the nodes and take it out of the cluster for a little bit so that you can, at that point, use it to build and push the new templates or updated templates up there. Some quality of life things that I've found that help a lot is to have a couple of pseudo aliases in my shell, particularly the LSVM, the cluster join, cluster disjoin. Otherwise, it's sort of like with cluster join there, where there's a bunch of different parameters in there. It's pretty much everyone opens a terminal and holds the up arrow until they see it go flashing by, and then grab it and change what they need in it. I just make them aliases, and as I work on machines, I add the aliases in. These are in a gist on my GitHub page, so you can go and grab those from there if you want. It just makes it nicer to work with the command line. As far as template creation goes, there's a couple of different ways to do this. You can do a scripted build, and either with a shell script or they've got a Packer plugin as well. Talking to VR2 about it, they recommend the shell script over the Packer plugin, simply because I don't think they have the quite the bandwidth going into the Packer plugin that they would like to do. So when we build images, we build these just with regular scripts. They just run in the terminal, and we script out the Anka command for everything we need it to do. When you build your templates, the recommendation here is that you make at least 2 templates. One is the base operating system. This is just Mac OS configured to run in your environment and nothing else. Right? That's your base. Then you make a clone off of that adds in the developer tools. And so when you get that, you've got this base image that's static, and you would then have this developer tools image that is on top of it. So generally we name them something like this. We'll have macOS 12.4-base, and then we do a clone and install Xcode and all our dev tools, And in that case, then it becomes -build. That way, we've got this base image. And if Xcode changes, we can just make a new DevTools clone and leave the base image alone. And in fact, you can see that because you can have multiple clones pointing back. And so you can have your Xcode 13 prod image, but you can also have an Xcode 14 beta image here so that developers can switch their workflows between the two versions of Xcode. And you didn't have to reinstall macOS or anything like that. You've just been able to use the same base image and build different tools on the top of it. And then those show up as templates that you can use for running your build scripts. So Xcode, right? This is the one that everybody goes crazy about because, well, how do you put Xcode in there? Do you get a package? Do you get a zip? What do you do? The easiest way to install Xcode in a template is just to copy it. That's the thing, right? When you download Xcode as a zip, you just drag, copy, install it. So you can just download it and then copy it into the image. Anka has a copy command, Anka CP, that's the top one in the red here, and you can use that to copy something into an image. And so when we're building our DevTools image, we just run Anka CP and we copy the Xcode version that we want into that applications folder on that template that we're building. It is faster than using SCP or anything like that. They've got some benchmarks on their page that you look at there. And then the secret invocations to make everything work at that point is that you can accept the license with Xcode Build. You can run through the first run first launch procedure, which is where Xcode wants to install additional tools every time that it updates. You can script that as well using Anka Run. We then tend to reselect the Xcode as the tool, as the build tool, and then also the DevTools security. We run just for good measure because we have a couple of teams that their workflows depend on having that enabled as well. But using those couple of steps, you can install Xcode wherever you need it, and it will not prompt the user for installations or EULAs or anything on first launch, which is exactly what we need. So on your cluster, do you log into Xcode or not via Apple ID and the Xcode accounts pane? And there are some situations where you kind of have to, if you want to use automatic code signing, and it is a pain because these Apple IDs that are developer Apple IDs, they can't be managed Apple IDs. They require two-factor authentication. So, and they time out very quickly. So you end up having a lot of revisions of templates, which is simply someone logging into the image, starting up a template, re-authenticating to Apple and the Xcode accounts preferences, and then saving the template again. And the way around this is to use the API token for App Store Connect. So you can get an API token, and then you can use that with your build process to do the authentication up to Apple. A couple things to know about that. One is that you can't have a username entered into the accounts pane if you're going to use an API token. It's got to just be API token or nothing. You can use the API token with Xcode Build. You can use it with Fastlane. In some cases, it doesn't do everything you would need it to do with Xcode Build. The biggest example for me is that you can't do developer ID signed Mac apps with Xcode Build and an API token. You can with Fastlane in an API token. So at that point, you would go through it and use it that way. But logging into Xcode will drive you crazy. So get over to a API token as quickly as you can on your Xcode builders. For other tooling, Homebrew and Gem and things like that, we use brew files and gem files. This is where it has a file that it will run and install everything in there. Generally, the easiest way to set these up is to take a machine that's already all configured, and then both gem and brew will output a brew file based on what's installed already. So you can have those set up, and that way you've just got a text file that you just copy the text file in and run brew against it or run gem against it, a bundler against it, and it will then look at that file and install all those dependencies and everything else that you need. Otherwise, you're going to be trying to list all these things in the script, brew this and brew that and brew this other thing, and just have one file that you're running. If teams require other tools beyond what you put on as a template, this is where I put it on them. I say, okay, install it. If you need something that no one else at the company needs, then that's on you. Install that at runtime. So when your job starts up from Jenkins and it creates a new VM, just have the first step in your Jenkins file or whatever you're using be to install those dependencies, to do that configuration that's unique to your team, because it's unique for those teams and unique for those builds. So we don't want to make other teams have to deal with that. So this way, if you've got specific needs for specific build trains, they can use those on their own. Last little bits of tips here, whether you suspend or stop the VMs in the registry. Stop the base OS. The one that's the base, you stop it. It doesn't need to be running. It's just the base bits. It's not the template that's getting started automatically. When you suspend a template, you also save a RAM file for it, right? So if you've got 10 gigs of RAM for each VM, then you're saving a 10 gig file to hold that RAM, and that makes your template 10 gigs bigger, and when you push that template around or nodes pull it, it's 10 more gigs of traffic that has to get pulled. So stop the base VMs. Typically with builders, you're going to suspend the builders. So you just suspend the builder. It has that RAM file in it, but that means that it can have instant startup. You get when Anka goes to start one of these, it starts within 30 seconds, if that long. It'll be up and running just fine. So that allows for instant spin up of these. The only time when you have to stop the builders is if you're using nested virtualization. So if you're using Docker inside your Anka VM, then you'll need to stop it and start it. You can't do suspensions. So to get help on all this, VR2 is pretty great. They've got the Slack channel on Mac admins. They have their own dedicated Slack as well, where the dev team is, all the support team is in there, and they help quite a bit with everything you need. They have some pretty good documentation. It's getting better. Their documentation is on GitHub also, so you can submit changes to it if you find errors. I've pointed out a couple omissions and errors to them that they've fixed as well. And they also have a presence on GitHub where they have things like getting started, and they've got scripts you can just grab that are builder scripts to build things. So if you've got stuff you want to do that way, you can go ahead to there and just jump in. I'm also around to help. I'm Max Home on all your favorite social networks. I'm Max Home on GitHub. I've got the GIST up there. Once I get final approvals for it, I'm going to post up on my builder scripts as well after they've been sanitized, so that folks can take a look at those to build things out with. I'm also on Twitter sometimes, not a whole lot, and on Slack as Max Home also. So if you ever need to find me, you can just take a look around for Max Home, and that'll be me. And with that, we're going to switch over to Discord here for some Q&A.